Unleash your creative spirit and join best-selling authors Devin and Arin Hiscock for a magical start to Rhinebeck weekend at the Rhinebeck Fiber Spirit Retreat hosted by the Omega Institute.
Attendees will enjoy 5 nights and 4.5 days of friendship, artistry, and skill development,
centered on expressing their unique connection to spirit through fiber artistry in the heart of picturesque upstate New York.
Fiber Spirit Retreat is ideal for knitters, crocheters, weavers, spinners, and fiber enthusiasts of all kinds. In addition to 5 meaningful workshops, attendees will be treated to a swag bag full of supplies and everything they could possibly need to participate in our retreat that weekend, including an exclusive print edition of the Fiber Spirit Pattern book by yours truly.
Hi, I'm Arin Hiscock.
And I'm Devin Hunter. Let me ask you, Arin, what are you excited about?
Well, first of all, I'm really excited about the fact that this is going to be a great introduction to Rhinebeck weekend. I love going to the New York Sheep and Wool Festival. It's a place where I get to go and meet a whole bunch of friends, other fiber artists. We hang out together, so it's a great time to sort of rejuvenate my soul. But it's also great because I get to see so many colors, touch so many different kinds of fibers and yarns. I get to look at what other people have done. Part of the fun of wandering around the festival is seeing what everybody's wearing, what they've worked on over the past year, and being inspired that way. I'm also really looking forward to sharing some introductory skills with people for specific fiber arts that they may not have tried before. Like, for example, my jam is spinning. And so I'm really looking forward to introducing people to, the mechanics of a drop spindle, but also talking about choosing fibers and the different associations different fibers have, correspondences, and how to forge a personal relationship with the different energies that they give off.
Yeah.
What about you, Devin? What are you excited about?
I think I'm kind of excited about pretty much the same thing. Rhinebeck is going to be an awesome experience just to go to the Sheep and Wool Festival, to start it with a bunch of spiritually minded fiber enthusiasts, and to be able to share ideas and concepts and patterns. That's kind of mind-blowing. I'm really excited about that. But I'm most anticipating the process of getting together and talking about our spirituality, no matter what that is, no matter what our background is, and how we use the fiber arts to incorporate not only our beliefs and our faith, but most importantly, how we use it to express our spirituality. And that is what I'm the most excited about.
It's going to be a great weekend, and I'm really looking forward to it.
So, Arin, what have you been up to? So let's start with that, because I feel like we don't really get a chance to just catch up and talk about like stuff that isn't like the world's ending kind of stuff. But like, aside from that going on, like, how has your winter been with your making and your thoughts on like kind of the process right now? Because we're at different stages in our crafts, and so I'm really curious as to like where you're at this year, how you're feeling about what it is that you're making, and all of that good stuff.
I'm fighting my body these days. I'm starting to have sort of overuse issues with my hand right through here. So I'm not wearing it right now, but I've been wearing a brace to stabilize it a lot of the time. So that helps. And it's just to stop me from doing stupid things like grabbing a door that's closing and having it, bend back and things. I've been working with an osteopath and a physiotherapist for like my general body stuff. And the physiotherapist thinks I've got hypermobility, which would explain a lot. So I've become hyper aware of how I use my body, and that extends to my making.
Hmm.
So um, I've had to listen to my body a lot more. Normally, I'm just like, I'm gonna do this thing, and
Hmm.
the next day I'll regret it. But as I've been working through things, it's like, okay, well, I can't do this for as long as I want to. I need
Yeah.
to, you know, enjoy what I can while I can. So, I've got a pair of socks that I'm knitting sort of within arm's reach of the Chesterfield downstairs, so I can just grab it and knit a couple of rows and feel like I accomplished something.
Yeah.
Um, the winter was rough in a lot of ways. I didn't have a lot of energy or focus for things other than just sort of getting through the day. But recently, I guess early February, I kind of went, you know what? I want to spin again. More
Mm.
than just like a little bit here and there. So I've been putting shows on in the evening and I'll say, okay, I'm going to spin through this chunk of fiber.
Hmm.
And I've been teaching myself to switch back and forth between my hands so I'm not always, controlling my fiber supply with this hand.
Hmm.
Um, and it's been really, really good for me. It's been it's been grounding and it's been calming. It's been
Mm.
calming, and so, I finished spinning a set of fiber that I got, around Christmas time. Um, Hilltop Cloud, one of my favorite,
Mm.
fiber suppliers,
Very quick.
always
Yes.
puts out
Good
a
stuff.
always puts out a 12 Days of Christmas set,
Yeah.
and you get, like, 20 grams of fiber a day of a special blend that they designed or a color that they specifically chose for something. And it's always on a theme. So I finished that packet just last week and then I picked up a new bag of something that was waiting for me. And I'm reminding my hands of what it's like to work with different fibers.
Hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
good. That's really good. It's like, all right, I'm reawakening all this stuff again. And I realize that a lot of it is a cycle.
Hmm.
A lot of it is a cycle for me. I mean, a lot of people go, "Oh, it's winter, I'm gonna sort of hibernate and make." And I don't have the energy to make in the winter
Yeah.
the way I do in the spring and fall. So, we're coming up on spring, and my make energy is kinda going, "Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, here we go. We remember how this works." So that's
Yeah.
been good for me. What about you? What have you been working on?
I mean, everything's been about the dye studio pretty much.
Mm,
I mean, like since before January, because it was months of trial and error and figuring things out, and then asking the question like, do I really want to do this? It's like, because I don't do little, like, my problem is I have my mother's curse. I don't do little things. I do big giant things, right? And so my with this, it's just been trying to make sure I'm doing it right, but also the awareness that like it's taking off in a way, and I'm very blessed, and I feel really, really incredibly blessed. But like, it's a lot. It's a whole lot. So I went to a conference to go teach for like a week. Came home, I got sick on the way home, and I came home to all of these yarn orders, and I'm like, it's just me. I have to, So I was resting, and I've been catching up on yarn orders and dyeing, and also adding new bases to the lineup, which has been really cool. Because I've been on the hunt for months for like a really good quality single ply wool. I just want a nice, good quality single ply. I don't want anything crazy. Because part of it is fiber gets expensive, and so I have higher end stuff on the website already, and I'm like, it might be a little too much for the average person, so let's try to find something just a little more economical. And when I'm making, that's usually what I go for first, and then my second time making it, I'll use the really fancy stuff or whatever. But so yeah, so it's just been a whole process of making sure I got the right bases in, and we did, so it's been fantastic. But that's where I'm at. So I was just lamenting last night that I haven't had time to like really knit a whole lot because I've just been dyeing fiber. And then by the time I'm done with all that, I don't really have the bandwidth to go and knit a bunch or, whatever. And I'm glad you were talking about the wrist stuff. So I too have a brace that I have to wear, and but people are my background in another life. I'm a dance person. I choreograph, and I teach people how to dance and move. Physiology is a big part of just my life ever since I was a kid, because of that. But just being involved in the activity, and now that I teach, it's a big part of what I do. So when I started getting, and this is now the thing that I have to deal with myself. So when I started getting the long form like streaks of pain and things down my wrist, I was terrified because I'm like, first of all, I'm not even 40 yet. I'm getting close, but I'm not even 40 yet. So we had this whole moment of like, is this really happening to me? Is this really going down? And it is. And so I have the brace, and I had to use it a couple years ago. So I was lucky enough that I had it, and I was able to just slip it on and take care of it. But we went on this trip, and I shoved the brace in my knitting bag, and I'm thinking like, okay, it'll be there if I need it. And of course I needed it, and I wasn't using it. And I go back to the hotel room, and somehow there's another brace sitting underneath the little footstool. It wasn't my brace. It's a completely different brand, everything. But it was the powers that be were like, no, Devin, you really need to use this brace. So I put a brace on, but I didn't put that one on because I was like, I don't know whose brace this is. But very weird to have that happen, right? Like out of no, did the cleaning people not clean and find the brace when they were cleaning the room? Like that's a whole other thing to be a little worried about. But just the idea that suddenly, and they weren't coming in our room because we had like the do not disturb thing on. So it was very, weird and fun in the Y way, right? The weird with the Y way. And we were at a magical conference. It was for magical people over in Michigan. So I'm not at all surprised that something weird and cool happened. But yeah, so it's definitely, I'm feeling it, and I'm on a mission this year. And part of what we're going to be talking about at our Rhinebeck retreat is this, about how can we help our bodies as we're making, right? Like how can we deal with the pain that we have? How do we deal with our posture? What does all that mean? And the thing that I'm tripping out on as I'm going through this, and I've been going through all my old like yoga notes and everything, is just the idea of like when we're making, how often so many of us tend to slouch over, and what that posture alignment does just for like your vital forces, your life force, is like mind blowing, the impact that can have. And when you're connecting to these fibers and things, like you want it all open, you want everything to be nice and clear. So I'm finding that even things like posture now I'm being extra aware of because I've been reading a lot and I've been trying to apply things because I don't want to walk into a retreat and be like, oh, I don't actually do this, So
do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah. So when you're spinning, are you finding yourself, do you tend to lean over a lot when you spin, or are you able to kind of pull back?
Not when I spin, because if you lean forward, I use wheels a lot. So if you lean forward, you're actually compromising the leg motions you need. Now, in theory, what you're doing when you spin on here, I'll do it sideways so you can see when you're spinning on a treadle, is we think of pushing down and then releasing. But if you're working on a single treadle, that doesn't necessarily work so well because you do this and the wheel has an impetus, but very often doesn't have enough to come up around again, unless you've really got momentum going. So what you do is you push down with the toe, but then you think of coming down with the heel. Because of course a treadle isn't hinged like our hand is here. It's actually hinged here. So there's a motion like this that happens. So if you just think of pushing down like that all the time, you're actually compromising your movement. It's not as efficient as it could be. So if you've got your foot there and you push down, but then you think of bringing your heel down too, you're controlling the movement better. So I find that if I lean forward, I'm actually compromising the energy that goes through my leg to create that muscle impetus in my ankle and my foot. So I'm pretty hyper aware of that. So I tend
It's
to.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's really
I always
interesting.
assumed it was like driving, like you just like how you kind of drive with the tip of your toes. I didn't
Yeah,
realize
exactly.
there was this alternate motion that you have to make to get everything going. That's fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And the other problem with driving, which is another problem that I have, my right leg, my right hip is it is having opinions.
Mhm.
And when I drive, because you've got that toe motion happening, and you don't actually have a straight on push because your foot is always slightly at an angle so it can move back and forth between the gas and the brake, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you're constantly doing this. So there's a lot more stress happening on the ankle joint than you think there is. It's not just straight up and down. You're constantly going back and
Mm-hmm.
forth. I don't need to worry about that when I'm spinning, thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it does give me a problem when driving. The other thing about spinning is I find I don't slouch doing it, but I do find that I bring my hands up like this a lot. And you can see what's happening with my shoulders already.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'm bringing it up to control, and that's something that I do have to remind myself of a lot is I need to bring my shoulders back and down. And to help with that, sometimes I use a pillow on my lap.
Mm-hmm.
So I can support my forearms on it, and I don't need to worry about holding the weight of my arms. I mean, the weight of the fiber is negligible, but I don't have to worry about holding my hands up in the air for too long. I can rest them on that pillow, and I've removed an entire stress
Mm-hmm.
through my shoulders and upper body. So that helps with the relaxation as well. So I'm fortunate in that. I'm trying to teach myself when I knit to do the same thing, to lay my forearms on a pillow on my lap. So I'm not constantly doing this, because that is something I will do when I knit. I was like, oh my God, I'm so stressed.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard not to do though. I mean, I got my glasses on, right? So I've got this, but they're on the tip of my nose so that I can do this, right?
Mhm.
So, and then I'm just this the whole time, and don't talk to me. I'm counting stitches. How dare you even whisper? Like it's a, yeah.
Don't
So I
think
mean,
too loudly around me.
yeah, and you just end up, and knitting in the car is really hard for me too, because of that. So like that's the other thing. I totally cheat. I know you're not supposed to, and I would totally get arrested or something. I'd get a ticket for this, but I totally do the like. I have a commute when I work with the kids that I work with. It's like a 2-hour long commute because of traffic.
Oof.
It's so bad. It's that time of day. And so it normally would take me like 40 minutes to get home. It takes me 2 hours to get home sometimes. So I'll be sitting in traffic, and I totally have a whip in the passenger seat. I will pick that up, and I'm going to be sitting there for an hour anyway. I might as well start going through. So I got like 2 blankets done last year that way, which was great. I mean, but very, very bad. But if I'm in the passenger seat, I have a really hard time with that whole just going at it for too long, right? Everything crunches over, and
Yeah.
I get a little nauseous because it's like reading in the car. So
Yeah.
that's the other thing, right? So yeah, not
So unfair.
yeah. I mean, but it's also, what else are you gonna do on a road trip? Like I can't imagine. I will go stir crazy. It's either that or sleep. Like I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, I'm totally. I feel that 100%. So when you're drop spinning, and this I have some experience with. I was really blessed to have a teacher somebody who was a teacher who taught drop spindles, and I befriended her, and so she became my teacher kind of by proxy, even though it wasn't like an official thing. Friends are. And so the woman who I learned to drop spin from, it was part of her tradition, of her magical tradition, and part of the magic that she did. And so really early on, I had this idea of like, oh yeah, this could be very potent, powerful, spiritual stuff that is possible. And I was lucky so the town I grew up in, this place is no longer, it's called Wendy's World, and it had been there forever and ever and ever. And this woman named Wendy owned it, and she had the most beautiful green eyes you will ever see in your life. They were otherworldly green. And I went in, and I looked out of place. I was this, this dude with a beard walking. Even back then I had the beard, dude with a beard walking in. And I was like, do you have drop spindles? So she was very sweet. She hooked me up, and she got me an Ashford. So my first drop spindle was this beautiful Ashford.
But it was
That,
also a boat anchor. It was
yes.
super heavy. That's what I call the ones, the commercial ones. Yeah, they're boat anchors.
Learning on that was fantastic, though, I will say. It's terrifying because I broke many a thread, but also fascinating. So I was lucky enough to have this amazing woman I could go to just basically down the road, who had this shop, buy fiber from her, and I still have some of the fiber I bought from her like 20 years ago. I'm just in bags. I just can't part with it yet for some reason, because it's from this special woman that isn't with us anymore. But it's there, and it's just kind of a really beautiful alpaca waiting to be spun out. But having that experience, and then kind of realizing that there's this heritage, like, and that was part of what her business was about, was tapping into this local heritage there in our weird little tip of Appalachia. Um, for the people who were continuing on these traditions and these things that had, obviously they came from immigrant families and things like that, but you develop regional everything. Like, I had no idea that there was this beautiful history with that. So when it came to drop spinning, for me, that became very quickly the most fascinating part of all of it, were the cultural things that we've picked up and we've included. And I didn't realize how universal the drop spindle was.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. It's one of the things that always amuses me is when people excavate a new area and they find these little round things, and they're like, oh, they must have been some kind of, and almost any spinner will look at it right away and go, oh, that's a spindle whorl. That's a spindle whorl, because do I have one within reaching distance? I do not, because they're stuck into distaffs downstairs. Because the stick, which will come out of the little metal or stone donut that we use as the weight in the whorl, the stick doesn't last. It's just the little bit of stone or metal that. So when you realize that they find these things all over the world, in different regions with different cultures, everybody needs fabric. Right? I mean, and how you make it, I mean, is, whether you're finger twisting or whether you're using some sort of system to add twist to it so that it becomes stronger. You can add different strands together to make a larger strand, and then those strands together to make an even larger strand. I mean, we still use rope. Steel cable uses this same concept, right? So,
Yeah.
but everybody needs fabric. And when you think about the fact that every bit of fabric before industrialization took hold had to have been made from thread that was hand spun, it's bonkers. This was part of everybody's life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing how, yeah. The history of textiles is the other thing that I've been geeking out on a lot lately, and I cannot express how fascinating it is to me to go all the way back to some of these dig sites and find the difference in fabric, and how once things were actually woven together, there was, again, a surprising amount of universality to the experience. And that, again, is this mind-blowing, and obviously people would have talked and trade would have happened, and all of these things, but there's still this universality to it that people just kind of figured it out real quick, like, this is what we got to do going out. And we know that it started, like, a lot of what we understand as far as modern textiles and how things kind of developed, we're looking all the way back to Neolithic era, like when people were in caves and we're figuring this stuff out. And that is incredible to me. This is it's like, it really is human heritage. Making materials is human heritage. It's fascinating to me.
And as you said earlier, like, regionally, there is always like a local culture that develops, because the plants and animals available to you won't be the same as the ones that are available on the other side of the country, for example, let alone, across an ocean. So you learn to use what's available to you in a way that somebody else wouldn't, because they have something else, in their toolbox already. So this is one of the reasons why I find South American textiles especially interesting, because when you had the European colonizers come over, there's you can see the difference between how the South American people would use textiles and the plants and animals at their being what they can access, versus the textiles that came over. And it's absolutely fascinating to see that how, even though obviously colonizing established a heck of a lot and started edging things out, we still have indigenous practitioners who use these older techniques, and they still produce so many textiles that are used on a daily basis. Like, hats off. It's it's something that is absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, yeah. And I also have to say that if you're in South America, you have easy access to alpacas, and they're the cutest things in the world. So, I mean, there's that, and you can always just go pet an alpaca. I don't get to pet an alpaca. I'm in California. Actually, no, I did hear there's an alpaca farm that's kind of close. I want to steal the husband. That's so. Speaking of totally segueing away from this, we'll come back. So, speaking of Rhinebeck, I was preparing him for Rhinebeck, and I'm like, okay, this is the plan. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go Indie Untangled on Friday. Then we're gonna, I was giving him the list, and he has no idea. It's going right over his head. It's fine. It's fine. Bless him. Bless him. He's there for the ride. I'm so glad. And I was like, but I do have good news for you. There is a petting zoo, and he's like super vegan fluffy guy. Like he's all about it. I was like, there's baby alpacas. They have baby. You can pet an alpaca, and he was like, okay, I will do whatever I got to do to go pet that alpaca. So he's here for it. So when you're walking around Rhinebeck, and if you see Arin and I, come say hi, and you'll probably see my husband with me, who was just there for the alpacas.
Just there for the alpaca.
Yeah, that's what he's here for. But to that end, yeah, no. So one of the things that I'm having a really good time with, and I bought a couple of books out of hand's reach, but I've bought a couple of books specifically about Southwestern and Southern Hemisphere, the art that's coming up around there. And I know that folks, I'm not saying that they're all the same thing, because I'm very aware there's a continent's difference of things, but you have to understand from where I'm coming from, it's all new. Right, like anything that's kind of south of the border is basically newish, and we had like a Southwestern style, but it's not the same at all. It's a very different thing, and I've never really gotten into it. But when I started, I have friends who are weaving, and I have friends who are making things, and they're in South America, and they're using these. I'll post links down below, guys. Check them out. But they're doing some beautiful making some beautiful patterns and things that are from regional cultures and traditions, and that stuff is beautiful. Like we absolutely must preserve this sacred stuff. We don't have that in our culture in the same way. I think the closest thing would be like tartans, probably, but otherwise, like, we don't really have that same kind of lineage. We'll go with that word.
Good.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated by that. Is there some
culture being woven into textile use? I mean, we lost so much with the Industrial Revolution, right? And maybe things like programmed looms, right? The ones that still run on these huge rolls. They look like player piano rolls, or cards that are all together. The ones that, some of those cards date, they're centuries old. You're looking back at, like, because this stuff was technically before the Industrial Revolution, but they knew how to do this. Like, okay, we can program this loom to respond to lift certain drafts and lower other shafts by running these things through. And okay, it's this pattern we're reading, we'll do this movement, and the most incredible patterns come out. So that type of thing. And when you're just starting weaving, you're like, oh my God, how can I make these beautiful patterns? And it's like, it involves so much thought and so much planning, and it's absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, it is. And then, and again, I mean, I guess to some extent, you've got, at one point in time when you didn't have to have a 9 to 5 and you didn't have to do all the same things, and your life was much more connected to living, I guess we'll just say that, you would have had time to be creative in that way, and you would have had a history and a heritage, and hopefully you would have learned something from your mother or your grandmother or your grandfather, and be able to pass those things down. And that's the that is the beauty of something that not a lot of us have these days, right? And that's why, like, looking at South American art and textiles is just, it's been so inspiring. Is it boils down to this very thing there. And I feel like too, as we are, the stuff that we're exploring in our talks and the stuff that we're exploring in our books, and just the people the type of people we're into it. We're into the idea that, because we're animists, so we have this notion that there's an indwelling spirit and vibration in all of these things, and all the fibers, and all of that matters. And how we relate to that as creative people it has a huge impact on how we make what we make, why we make what we make. And I'm really excited to see that discussion happening in other places, right? And so I think what we're here to do, I think more than anything, is to shed a light on it and celebrate it, right? And to just go ahead and fully go a little cuckoo, and that was like, go a little Cocoa Puffs, right? Like, I had that moment of like, am I really going to sit here and talk about like the spiritual vibration of I'll use alpaca. Alpaca is my animal today. Yes, I am. Yes, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why alpaca has this fantastic vibration. We're going to talk about yak, and so, like, going into that, yak is a really powerful animal, actually. Like, do you need strength? Do you need resilience? You should put some yak in that, So there's these things that I think we approach, how, directions that we're approaching textiles and making and the fiber arts that used to be, I think, a lot more common. We'll just put it that way, right? The at least the approach that being aware of how those animals and those fibers impact us in our lives. Like, I think there's a detachedness that you have when you can just kind of go in and pick up a polyester yarn or something and walk away from it. Like, you remove yourself from something that's really quite beautiful. Right,
Yeah.
the cycle of fiber.
Fiber, yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, even when like we're talking about, like, for example, acrylic yarn, which is essentially a melted plastic that is extruded, and there would be times, I think, where something like that might be appropriate. But other times, especially if we're looking at it within a spiritual or devotional context, something that has, like, the closer to nature that it can be, the more we can connect with it, and an easier time we'll have working with the energies toward whatever goal we're working toward. Be it just, I need to chill while I work on something, or, I am specifically spinning this yarn to then weave a small altar mat,
Right.
To go under a deity statue, for
Right.
example. I think having the ability to pick and choose those things and optimize our opportunity for connection
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
something larger is great. And of course, I mean, there will be degrees of all of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, sure, maybe you will have bought a 100% wool yarn off a yarn store shelf, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe you will have shaken the hand of the shepherd who raised a sheep and then had it shorn, and you take the degrees, how many of those degrees you choose to engage with
Right.
is up to you, but also is going to be contextualized by your situation.
Yeah.
I mean, let's
Yeah.
be honest. A lot of
Absolutely.
people aren't necessarily going to be able to make a connection with someone local to use local wool that's been shorn, or
Right.
you know
Right.
um
Yeah.
so there isn't anything wrong
Mm-hmm.
with using what is available to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things I'm looking forward to exploring as well, I don't remember which workshop that I have it connected to in my brain, but maximizing the energy of whatever supply you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
So even if you don't have, the yarn, the wool that was right off the sheep,
Right.
we can maximize our connection to the yarn that we bought off a local yarn store shelf, or we ordered from Hella Good, or
Yeah.
whatever.
I like good yarn. Check it out. Yeah. Well, and I'm with you on that. I feel like, so like when we're making, like, let's say magical oils, so to like pull in these other things that we do, a lot of the times, like the tradition is to put a little bit of synthetic oil in the EO mix, the essential oil mix, for two reasons. Longevity is one of those things. It helps stabilize and give a shelf life to oils that otherwise wouldn't have that shelf life. And then the other thing is that it's often that you can find a synthetic oil for something that is either incredibly hard to find or unethical to produce, like musk, right? So like there's some, so you'd use those things. So we find that in the fiber stuff too, right? So like I have, like, one of my bases is 80% superwash merino, 10% cashmere, 10% nylon. That nylon is in there for longevity. It's there to make sure that, because you're making
you don't wear through the yarn that you've
exactly
knit into a sock.
Yeah. And so, that all matters to me. And I think even when, like, when I'm choosing bases and stuff for the studio right now, I'm looking at that idea of longevity, and like, if you want an heirloom piece, those aren't easy to take care of, right? And how many of us have like heirloom, something that our grandmother had, and it's made by this very special wool, and it's hard to clean and it's hard to maintain, and you never want to take it out of the box, and you never want to. I don't love those pieces, right? And I love the memories, but I don't like taking care of them necessarily. And so for me, that's become a big thing, as and I love, like, I have a Noro collection. I was collecting vintage Noro for a while. So, and I'm done. But I have a lot of like vintage Noro, and like going through that, it's not soft, it's not cuddly, but it's made out of all of these cool fibers. And I was like into it. But taking care of that stuff is kind of a nightmare. And I'm like, I don't want to go back and, kind of do that. So I have, on one hand, I have this thing where it's like, at the end of the day, what's going to be easiest to take care of, to pass down, things like that. That's what I'm thinking about, especially when it comes to makes, because so many of us are making things to be heirloom. And yeah, 100% like Lopi wool, that stuff will last forever. There's, a reason for that. I can't get my hands on. It's also not very soft, so I don't love working with it, right? And so there's a trade-off to there's all of these things to consider, right? And if you are somebody who, what you have access to is Walmart and Red Heart Super Saver yarn, use it. Like, there's because at the end of the day, it's about you expressing your spiritual your process and your art. That's what matters, right?
Yep, and the energy you put into it. So no matter what supplies you are using, you can be using plastic needles and acrylic yarn, but you are creating, you are putting energy and focus into that, and that transforms it. So on one hand, whenever we start a new craft, we often say, use the best stuff you can afford. Because in general, the better the tool, the easier it will be to do whatever you're supposed to do with it. But, we've all been in situations where we've had to go to the thrift store and buy secondhand yarn or a bag of random needles to sort through to do stuff with, right? We've all been there. So, yeah, on one hand, we want to use these incredibly meaningful things, and we want to create these heirloom pieces. But on the other hand, there's that practicality, which harkens back to the whole, every single textile had to use hand spun thread, right? That was an everyday thing. Your socks, your undergarments, your overgarments, your mittens, the altar cloths, the sails on the ships, all these things were handmade. So we don't think of handmade stuff in quite the same way. We think of it as something special because we are used to mass-produced and manufactured stuff. So something handmade it has this wonderful energy and this cachet to it. It's like, oh, I made this. Whereas a couple of 100 years ago, people would be going, yeah, so we do this every day. What's the big thing? So when we think about decorating something, Or when we look at like Neolithic burial sites and we go through the textiles and really examine what's left, you realize that sometimes people decorated them for no practical reason. And you realize that these people were connecting or expressing something within themselves. And there's that special touch, right? You know, they were using what was available to them, the way we would use like plastic needles and acrylic yarn, but that doesn't mean you can't make something pretty with it,
Yeah.
you know?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like we're to riff off of that idea that homemade things are special now versus like, you know, and I remember
Right?
thinking too, like when I was a kid, there was like the homemade crochet blankets were like, ew, you didn't want that blanket, you wanted the fleece blanket, you wanted the nicer thing that came from the store. Now, and I don't know why, but I think in my head, you know, when you're a kid, it's all about fitting in, and it's all about having the clothes that everyone else has, and you know, all that kind of thing. So I think it had this notion that if you made your own clothes, you were poor. And I was a poor kid. So I was like, I tried real hard not to look poor, right? That was like a thing. And I didn't realize that's what was going on. But um, now it's the exact opposite, because now like it is expensive to have something made. It is
Holy
expensive
cow, yes.
to get that quality of work. That was something that, like, you know, grandma was doing, you know, we hadn't had no problem doing it. It's kind of mind blowing. Like I mean, like right now I have, there's a commission piece that I can't believe I took, but I was like, sure, I'll do it as a challenge. I'm glad I did, because I'm learning a lot. But this thing is, I'm already 40 hours in, and I just had to rip it all apart. Right. I dyed the yarn. I did all this stuff to rip it all apart. And that's because it's this huge thing, and one little thing went wrong, right? And so having this moment of like, there are people who do this every day, who this is, and they are not making mistakes in the way that I'm making these mistakes, and they're getting paid like little tiny bit
Right.
compared to, you know, it's insane. So when you, especially here in the States and in Canada, like when you have somebody make something, you're gonna pay a price for that, right? Like you're gonna have to pay a price. Even if we look at like the Arin market over in Ireland, right? Ireland, yeah.
Yep.
The Arin market, the wool market there, those sweaters you're paying
Very
for, even
expensive.
though massive amounts of them are being made by hand by these artisans, you're still paying for the labor, and you're still paying for
The
this
skill.
incredible skill.
Yes, yes, and that's something that, over the past 10, 15 years, I've really seen online in the fiber artist communities, which is, no, don't undersell, like, don't underprice your stuff, because sure, the standard comeback will be, "Well, I could go to Walmart and buy it for" it's like, well, then you are perfectly free to do so, but handmade items, you're paying for the supplies, you are paying for your time, and these days we are all very, very aware of what our time is worth. You're paying for the skill, the
Yes.
hours put in refining that skill. So yeah, you know, a pair of handmade socks, $80, yeah, you think about what it's made
Yeah.
from and who put the time in making it,
Yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It,
so
it without question. Yeah. I wouldn't,
yeah,
and I even like, I'm looking at, I've always been a big fan of the arts, like in supporting artists. I think it's a uniquely human thing that we can do what we do, and I think it's really cool and worth supporting whenever it's possible. And you know, sometimes there's definitely looking at something like, I could go home and make that myself. Totally, I'm a human being again, like we all do that. But there's also something to be said about finding somebody who's capable of creating something with joy in their heart that I would not have, because I would be going through the pattern going, you know, the whole time. And to have somebody who's just like, no, I just whipped this up and this is this amazing. Like, to me, that's far more enjoyable. It looks better. Like it's, you know, I've definitely found that there are a couple of artists that I will totally support. Like whether it's garments or, and I'm on a whole, like, I'm going to make my own clothes, which we're going to talk about in a second. But like, on a whole garment thing, or if it's like amigurumi. Like I love amigurumi. I think it's a fantastic art form, and you're not going to get the same piece that everyone else is getting, so you have something special and unique, and that's so cool. And I love amigurumi, but I am not an amigurumi artist, right? So there is a Open Chess Studios, I'll put the link down. She's amazing to me, the maker. I'm going to have her on the show. She's phenomenal. But like her work, I will support her till the day is long, because she's doing beautiful stuff. She loves what she's making. And I've never seen the attention to detail that I see coming out of her products. It's because she has this skill that she has developed over years and years and years. And that's worth buying. Like that piece is worth buying, because I know it's not going to just fall apart. I know it's not going to. So all of that stuff matters, right? And I think that, especially when you've got local industries that are set up to foster and support that, like there's something to go like explore, go figure out like what's going on with that community, go figure out what those people are doing, and you're going to learn something. You're going to walk away from it. And I think, again, being spiritual people, being able to look at those communities and look at those crafts people and see that skill is in and of itself a spiritual experience. I fully believe that.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to know that even if we can't support these people financially, because sometimes we're in a place of privilege where we can, and sometimes we can't, publicity and word of mouth is another form of energy exchange. You get pleasure out of looking at these things, even if you could never buy one yourself. But you want to support that person in their endeavors. You can share it on social media. Hey, look at this cool stuff I found. Or, send the link out somewhere and say, hey, this stuff looks great. Is anybody local? Go check them out at a local market or a local con or whatever. So in that way, we are still feeding energy into that cycle, that creative cycle, and we are supporting others. So there are so many levels to this. Like if we can't support in one way, there are other ways we can.
There are other ways to engaging that. Yeah, 100%. And especially, I mean, if you're as an artist, I can tell you exposure is not payment, right? Like that's it.
Sure.
But it is still a currency, and it's still something that's important to engage in. So whenever you get the chance to support an artist, whether it's like you're saying, putting out a meme with their, with their stuff on it, or you're able to buy something, do it. Right? Do it. Support artists. So important, especially in a world that's full of fakery, right? Authentic, genuine art is beautiful, and it should be supported, and it's getting harder and harder to find. So it's fantastic. Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you about, go back into Rhinebeck there for a second. So I have a goal, which may be a very stupid goal, but I don't think it's stupid. I think it's a good goal. And that is that I'm going to make a Rhinebeck sweater, because that's what you do, right? So now here's the thing. I have not made a sweater yet. I still have yet to make like a article of clothing that like is for me and fits me and all the things. And but I did dye yarn, and I have things picked out. I have a beautiful, speaking of yak, I have a beautiful yak blend that like I set up to the side for Devin. I'm very excited about it, but I have no idea what pattern I want to make. I keep going back and forth with things, and then I found a pattern, and I quit vaping, and when I quit vaping, I gained a little weight, and so I'm at this point where I'm like, well, I don't want to take measurements for this size that I am now, because I'm not going to be that size. At least that's not the plan, right? And so I'm kind of going back and forth, but I also like a loose fitting sweater. So I'm going through this whole process now where I'm like, it's Rhinebeck, it's happening. I need at least one sweater to wear. And because that's what you do, you get your Rhinebeck sweater. So have you participated in any of this Rhinebeck sweater business? Have you, like, what are your thoughts on this? Can you please enlighten me and those listening at home?
The first sweater I ever knit was for Rhinebeck. Yeah. Yep. And it was a nice big floppy black one. It had a tiny bit of shaping to it. It was a top-down raglan. I hate seaming things together. So top down is good for me. And then I think the next year I did a short sleeve one. sort of an empire waist with eyelets in it, and it was this beautiful cranberry color. And now if I wear it, I'm pretty sure I'll look like I'm a Christmas ornament. But but yeah, it's great because you have a community of other people doing it too, right? Like it's always my group of acquaintances and friends, and we're like, okay, who's doing what? And we got to the point where we're all like, okay, we don't need more sweaters. Everybody has plenty of sweaters. What are we going to do instead? So we decided to start choosing a shawl pattern that we could all knit. So we would all be using the same pattern, but everybody would choose different colors, different yarns, and that's great. And we always have group pictures with everybody holding up their shawl, so everybody could see, okay, it's the same basic shawl, but look how different the expression is. Look how individual every product is. I will admit there's a lot of stress involved in knitting a Rhinebeck project because you have a deadline. You have a hard deadline. And there are so many people who are knitting in the car on the way to the festival. But like I said, it's great to have this larger community of people sort of doing the same thing. There's a vibe that happens. There's sort of a collective unconsciousness aggregate that goes with this, and it's a lot of fun. I don't know whether I think, yeah, I don't think I'll be doing one this year because I don't want to stress my hand any more than I have to. But you can always pull out one you've knit before, because if people haven't seen it, then it's just like a brand new thing, right?
It's new. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've fallen in love with the, oh, did you make that? Yes, I did. I've fallen in love with that experience. I think it's fantastic. And I really want to make a sweater and be able to do that. And I have like the knitting machine. So my other thing is I can do a flat. I can do something that's meant to be seamed up, relatively easy comparatively to doing it. But a lot of the detail will go right out the window, right? Like, and so that's a big part, because I am not all about doing lace work and things like that on this machine. That is not happening. I'm not that patient. So we've talked about this, but I will totally like get through the endless stockinette. Like I'll get through that, and I think I can handle that on the machine. But of course the stuff that I'm looking at is it's all top down. So this machine is useless to me, for the most part. So I'm trying to figure it out, but I'm inspired by your chunky black, I don't know, because that's my color, obviously. But knitting black is not fun. So your first sweater, it was a black sweater. It was a chunky black sweater. Did you regret that later? Like, I'm just curious. Like, how did that go?
No, actually, I didn't, because I used a singles. It was
okay.
Dream and Classy Smooshy, I think. And when a friend gave it to me, it was originally a dull mustard color. So I dyed it. So the dyeing process may have reduced some of the fluff and the shedding you sometimes get with the singles.
Okay.
And because it was also a thicker yarn, it was Arin weight. It was easier to knit. I don't like knitting with fingering weight unless I'm doing socks. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't so bad.
Yeah.
It was okay.
Yeah. I'm running into the fingering weight issue right now where I'm like, why did I set myself up for this? Like, I think it was because all I was for a while there, like the most of the yarn that I was finding before I started dyeing that I was just falling in love with was all fingering weight stuff. And this is what most of the like hand dyers are using is fingering weight. And so I have this collection of fingering weight, and every day I look at it, I'm like, you're gorgeous. You are such a pain in the butt to work with, though. And I do not have, again, the patience. I could have the patience, but every fingering weight project I started last year is still waiting to be finished. Every single one of them. I did not finish one fingering weight project, and I probably have 6 of them. So I'm at this point where I'm like, no. Like, and I started doing like double strands so I could, bulk things up, and Like that works, but at the same time, it's not the same thing, so it's just a whole thing. It's been but the fingering weight, I fell into the trap. I wanted to have the pretty yarn, and I did it, and now I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm not going to use you for the
Yes, you
things I
will,
wanted
because you're going to
eventually.
weave.
Oh, see, that's my other thing. That's my hope for 2026 or 2025 is to finally get my loom. So I want my rigid huddle loom. I didn't get it last year, and I love my knitting machine, but I do have a little bit of remorse where I wish I would have gotten the loom, because I know I would have been rocking that, like 100% been rocking that. So okay, I will hold off. I will definitely hold it for weaving. Then I hadn't even
Yep.
thought about that.
Oh yeah.
Huh.
Yeah,
So is
no,
that the warp? Is that what most of the what's warping is fingering weight stuff?
warp is the one that goes lengthwise. Weft is the one that goes across.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's completely up to you. I mean, most of the time, if I had a really pretty yarn and I didn't necessarily have a lot of it, I would use some kind of neutral um, commercial yarn for the warp, and then I'd use
Mm-hmm.
my pretty yarn for the weft. Because if depending on how you set the yarn,
Mm-hmm.
you can make it something a little more weft faced, and that way you see more of what you're using as the weft, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
the sort of skeletal structure of the
Right.
warp.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, now I'm okay. Yeah, because there's some things I totally was like, this is gorgeous. Like I have some dream in color smushy cashmere that is not inexpensive, and I grabbed it because it was the right time, and it's just sitting up there, and I just every day I'm looking at it and I'm like, you would make the most beautiful garment. I do not have time for that. Okay, all right. So I will put that off to the side
Hold on to
for
it.
when I start weaving, because I'll
Yeah.
totally do that. Okay. Thank you for that, because I was getting a little discouraged. I was like, my stash is almost all fingering and I can't, like, I don't like it. So, yeah. That's the other thing with this year is I'm trying to do more. Well, I don't want to say bougie, because bougie is the wrong word, but like nicer quality, finding more nicer quality, heavier weights, I think is kind of on my list this year, where, last year it was all about all about fingering, and it didn't work out well. So I think that's the kind of the goal. And with dyeing, I can get away with a lot, actually, which is kind of surprising. So
I think something everybody has to keep in mind when you start a new craft like this is there's going to be a lot of trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
The experiences teach you so much. It's like I loved weaving, but the problem is an awful large percentage of weaving is the setup.
Mm-hmm.
And my body does not like setting up a
Set that
loom.
up.
It
Yeah.
does not like warping. It does not. It's
Mm-hmm.
really unfortunate because I love it. My grandfather was a weaver, and I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot do the warping. So that's unfortunate. But yeah, you're gonna if you try something new, you're gonna realize, oh, this is beautiful, but I can't work with it for these reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
either you discover that a yarn has a tendency to drift apart, not because it's a low quality, but because of the way you wrap the yarn around the needle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You might find that certain yarns work when you're knitting and they don't work when you crochet because
Yeah.
the movement is different.
Yeah.
You know,
Completely.
you may buy yourself a beautiful set of wooden needles and you're using them and that's all but then someone hands you a set of metal needles and you're like, oh my gosh, I can go so much faster with this.
Mm-hmm.
Or conversely, they may hand you the metal needles and the yarn you're using will slip off because you're used to the wood, which has a little more grip to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you'll be dropping things and you're like, no, I don't like these needles. So it's something that, I mean, earlier we said you use the best quality tools you can afford because it will make whatever you're learning easier. But at the same time, it's good to know that there's a thriving secondhand market for fiber tools.
Yes.
Because
Oh, yes.
people get to a point where this no longer serves me
Mm-hmm.
because my area of interest or my focus has shifted slightly, or my skill has hit a level where this tool no longer interfaces with my application in a way that's good for me.
Right.
So yeah, there's
Yeah.
a thriving secondhand market for fiber tools. And I mean, if you're starting out with something, buy secondhand.
Yeah. That's
I
what I,
mean,
that's why I got into bougie yarn. That was the gateway, was eBay. Yeah, I was just buying secondhand stuff, and it was always like, most of it was, oh, somebody bought too much for their sweater or whatever, and they just had 2 extra skeins left over. And so you get it at a discount, you get it at this great price, but you also get to experience it, right? Because like I'm not going to go out and spend all that money on Noro, like that isn't gonna. But being able to go and find batches of things was amazing. Being able to find like all of my first tools, almost all of my first tools came from eBay, from like lots of people. People also pass away, and then their kids are like, what
they
am I going to
do.
do with all this stuff? They don't even know what's going on with it. Like, that's a whole thing too. So yeah, eBay is amazing. Facebook Marketplace, I haven't played too much with, but I hear good things. And I think especially when it comes to, if you do want to play around with the things that are considered or you hear as being higher quality, then going secondhand is like the best way to start, always, completely, especially
Yeah.
when you don't know like what's up. So
Yeah.
100%, I feel you on that. All right,
It's also
well.
fun sometimes to have a meeting with friends, for example, or
Mhm,
like-minded people. Like if you can find a meetup or a guild or something like that,
yeah,
and just show up and say, "Hey, show me your stuff.
yeah,
You know, do you mind if I touch it, if I try it?" And most fiber artists are thrilled to share their
yeah.
stuff and say, "Oh my God, look at this! This is fantastic! This is what you can do with it," because it's a great way to get some hands-on experience and recommendations from other people, from
Yeah.
experienced people too.
I'm also a big fan of, if you ever get a chance to go to a local knitting circle or craft circle or whatever, do it. Do it, do it, do it. I am self-taught. I learned off of YouTube videos, and it wasn't until I went to my local knitting store and just sat down and I volunteered for something, and just being able to, just through osmosis, I picked up so much. And one of my knitting, I call them my knitting ladies. One of my knitting ladies from my knitting circle. No, one of my knitting ladies was just like, "Oh, can you show me how you're doing this?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'd love to." I like, and she was like, "You're doing it backwards." So they had this whole moment of like, oh, I was stitching backwards. And, I never would have realized. And it made a huge difference when I made the switch. And I suddenly, like, I have a garment here that I'm half of it was made backwards. So it was just this weird thing I was doing. And she's like, "No, you're wrapping it wrong." And I was like, "Oh." She's like, "It'll work." But, and so just having somebody with experience to be able to give you little pointers here and there, amazing. And that's something
Yeah,
like, we are familiar with that because of our spirituality. There's a lot of going to people who have experience and learning from them, and that's just part of the way that we function. So it wasn't like it's not a foreign concept for us to go to an experienced person and sit at their feet and listen, right? Like, we're accustomed to that. But I'm surprised that a lot of conversations I have with people, they do not comprehend that idea of, like, or if you can't afford a class, go to your library's knitting circle. Your library probably has a knitting circle. Like, there are things you can do. It just takes getting out of your comfort zone probably a little. And we're not all into that, which I get. But there's something about having those one-on-one experiences. Like, you and I are not knitting teachers. At a retreat, we're not going to be teaching people to knit. That is not our thing, or crochet or whatever, right? Oh, you don't want to come to a knitting class with me. But we can totally talk about all of these other things. So the goal with our retreat is to approach people who already have experience in their craft, and they just want to lean further into the spiritual aspects of that, regardless of whatever faith you're in and where you're coming from. And that's, at the end of the day, that's exactly what we're here. Like, we can do that. We can do that real good, right? And
that
so,
we can do.
yeah, that we can do very well. And so I'm excited about jumping into the Rhinebeck community and just being there, like doing the retreat on, in Rhinebeck, which is incredible. Like, if you come to a retreat, you're right down the road. Like, you don't even have to leave Rhinebeck. It's like proper. You don't go to Socrates. You can be right there in Rhinebeck. So, like, we're going from that retreat right into the event. And I'm stoked that we get to somehow kind of be part of it. Like, that's kind of
It just
cool, even if unofficially, right? but then to be there and to see some of the people I know we're going to get to see take the classes, because have you been looking at the classes and stuff this year?
I
Have you
have
gotten a chance to?
I have not yet. I have
I'm
taken
hearing things.
classes at other fiber festivals, and
Mhm.
it's amazing because as soon as you walk in the room, you're like, everybody here is here for the same reason. And so there's this instant excitement and there's this instant connection, and everybody is just immediately open to whatever the teacher is saying and thinking, and it's electric in that way. It's both
Can't wait.
stimulating and relaxing, and it's just
Yeah,
I love
I
it.
love a good class. I love a good class. So I can't wait. I can't wait to go into some of the things that we're going to go into, and we'll in other episodes we will dive in, because we have a whole year just about, or at least 9 months or something, to really dive into this. No, we don't even have that. We have 6 months, 6.5, 7
6,
months,
7, 8
something like that.
October
So
2.
yeah, this October we're going to be in Rhinebeck. But yeah, so it's happening. It's all happening, and so we got plenty of time though to talk about and dive in a little further into what it is that we are going to be doing. But I am super stoked to do this with you, because people don't. You and I are coming at this in the most interesting way from where I'm sitting. And the reason being that we have a career in a very different part of the world. We do very, very different things. It overlaps with this beautifully, like it truly does. And I can see that. I know you can see that. But we are not, this wasn't our thing, like at first, not in a let's talk about it with people kind of way. This was, our craft, and we're jumping into this. So you are a prolific best-selling author, and I am a best-selling author. But so, but we've got
You're
these.
putting in at least a book a year there, buddy.
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But and we're good. Like we do our thing. We know who we are. So this feels like I'm entertaining this part of me that I never would get a chance to in the public eye, and I'm just going crazy with it. I'm like, let's do it. Like it's gonna be awesome. Yeah. So how do you feel about that, the transition from, I mean, I know we got to go, but like, how are you feeling about going from teaching, earth-based spirituality and alternative spirituality to fiber and getting into
I
the
love
intersection
it.
of those things?
I
Yeah.
love it so much because, as you say, this is like a craft. It was a personal thing, and being able to see how they do slip into each other, that intersection, is so exciting. The idea that I can extend this thing that I do to other people and introduce them to this whole new idea of, you can take this thing and this other thing and you can do them in such a way that they enhance one another and make you a deeper person in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. It's
Yeah.
so exciting. And both of us as plant people,
Mm.
I like the whole concept of using plant-based fiber at some point in doing this. I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm super stoked. I'm super stoked. Yeah, all of it. I feel like it's all in a weird way, I feel like my life has been leading up to this in this,
Right?
and it's also nice to, like, I was talking to my friend Danielle, who owns my local yarn store, and I was talking to her about just how it's nice to let this very noisy car thing pass my house. Okay. I was explaining to my friend that it's nice to talk about a part of my spirituality that where I don't feel like I'm selling it. And you
Yeah,
kind of end up doing that when you're writing books about things, and you can't help it. You can't help but to end up in this kind of position. And it just starts to feel icky in a way. And it's not the subject matter. It's just this idea that I got to go up and talk about spirits, and I got to talk about ghosts, and I got to talk about all these things that I'm just like, at some point, it it's just heavy all the time, and I
all
needed,
the
like,
time.
I'm so desperate for something that's just higher vibe that I can get into and I can be colorful with, right? Like, because everything is black, everything is a shade of gray, like that's
Yeah,
just, but when I'm making stuff, it isn't. I mean, I'm color is everything, and I'm an artist, and so to be able to entertain this part of me and still have it woven into the foundational, like, things that make me is it's relieving, it's therapeutic. It's so like, I don't care what happens with any of this as long as we get to do it, because I'm getting this amazing experience out of it. So I'm just running with it, and we're gonna see what happens.
And as a teacher, you know too that when you start working with people who are there for a workshop or a session or whatever, their energy is invigorating too.
Yeah.
Their excitement and their openness, and they're willing to do it. So it all snowballs, you know.
Yeah.
So while there may be a little of, oh, I hope this goes okay at the beginning, as soon as everything starts, it's just the energy that comes up is so, it's amazing. It's amazing. And I'm really looking forward to that too. Just stepping into that room and being, all right, here we go. This is going to be amazing.
I'm excited. I'm so excited about Rhinebeck. Oh my goodness. And alpacas. We get to pet baby alpacas. It's going to be a whole thing. And people,
you know, there's an alpaca parade.
Yes.
Please tell him that there is an alpaca parade.
I made him sit down and watch the alpaca parade. I was like, this is what you will do. You will have cider donuts and you will pet alpacas while I am off stocking yarn. Like, that's what's going to happen. And we'll see. I mean, I don't know what I'm going to be, but I have no clue what I want. I don't know. We'll figure it out when I'm there. That's probably what's going to happen. But I'm really excited. I'm also excited about the idea of seeing how the event works and flows, because something that I miss, like, we don't really have an event out here. We do, but it's in the middle of summer. No one is buying wool in the middle of summer in California. It is not happening. The last time the event happened, it was 102 degrees. And I was like, I can't, that ruins the activity for me. Like, I can't do it. Go inside. Like, that was just not happening. So I have all, but that's a local thing where the weaving culture, the knitting culture, like, that's a thing that developed out here. So no harm, no shade, but it is definitely not my thing. And the weather keeps it from growing into a bigger thing. And so one of the things I'm looking forward to is seeing what an event looks like when it's very well organized and it has that history of bringing in a big crowd, and how the organizers just kind of navigate through all that. And so that's because I do event planning. So the other thing I'm really excited about is that, because I'm like, we have a lot of really cool yarn shops here. We should all be getting together and doing stuff. So that's like, yeah. So I like to see how a local community builds something like that, because it could be very inspiring when it comes to your own local community and what's possible. So that's the other kind of my other hidden agenda with this. So, but it all starts with making a sweater, Arin. I got to make a sweater.
It does.
We'll see how it goes. But anyway, everybody, thanks for tuning in. We will be back with more. Come and hang out on the road to Rhinebeck. And stay tuned.